Commander Thelvastrin stood before the holographic display with the pride of someone who had served in the Korvax fleet for over 200 years. His silver skin reflected the blue light from the massive projection that floated in the center of the lecture hall. The image showed a warship so beautiful that several students gasped when they first saw it. "This," Thelvastrin announced, his voice filled with satisfaction, "is the Celestial Dawn. She represents 3,000 years of Korvax naval engineering brought to perfection." The lecture hall of the Korvax Military Institute was unlike anything found on Earth. It orbited the neutral world of Meridian Prime, a place where 47 different species sent their best military minds to learn the art of warfare. The room itself was enormous, with seats arranged in a circle around the central holographic display. Students from across the galaxy sat in those seats, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes. There were the Korvax, tall and elegant with their silver skin. The Threxians sat nearby, their forearms taking notes on multiple datapads at once. A pair of Vosnik delegates whispered to each other in their musical language, their crystalline bodies chiming softly. Near the back, almost hidden in the shadows, sat Lieutenant Marcus Chen, the only human in the entire academy. Marcus had been at the Institute for 6 months now. Humanity had only joined the Galactic Assembly 15 years ago, and their membership had come after a war that nobody liked to talk about. The other species treated humans with a mixture of curiosity and caution. They were new, young, and carried themselves with a tension that made older species uncomfortable. Thelvastrin continued his lecture, manipulating the hologram with graceful movements of his long fingers. The Celestial Dawn rotated slowly, revealing her elegant lines and powerful weapons. "Notice the armor distribution," the commander said, highlighting sections of the ship in red. "We have concentrated our defensive plating along the bow and forward sections. This is where enemy fire will strike during engagement. The armor here is 3 meters thick, composed of compressed durasteel and energy-dispersing alloys." A Threxian student raised 2 of her arms. "Commander, what is the total mass of the vessel?" "Excellent question, Cadet Shearthal. The Celestial Dawn masses at 42 million metric tons. She carries a crew of 3,000, houses 120 heavy plasma cannons, and can maintain combat operations for 2 years without resupply." Impressed murmurs rippled through the class. Marcus remained silent, his dark eyes studying the rotating hologram with increasing focus. His jaw tightened slightly as the display showed the aft sections of the ship. "The design philosophy is simple," Thelvastrin explained. "We place our armor where it is needed. The forward sections face the enemy, therefore they receive maximum protection. The aft sections, the engineering spaces, the reactor housing, these areas receive minimal armor. Why waste mass on sections that will never face enemy fire?" The Vosnik delegates chimed in agreement. A young Korvax cadet nodded enthusiastically, already composing a report in his mind about the brilliance of the design. Thelvastrin gestured toward the weapon systems. "Our doctrine is straightforward, and has been proven over centuries of conflict. We engage the enemy head-on. Our forward armor deflects their attacks while our superior firepower destroys them. In 800 years of Korvax naval history, not a single ship of the line has been successfully attacked from behind." More nods around the room. This made sense. This was how civilized species conducted warfare, with strategy, with honor, with agreed-upon rules of engagement. "The Celestial Dawn can defeat any 3 enemy dreadnoughts in a frontal assault," the commander continued, his pride evident. "She is invincible from the bow, nearly unstoppable from the flanks, and her point defense systems ensure that no fighter craft or missile can penetrate her defensive sphere." In the back of the room, Marcus shifted in his seat. His hand moved toward the request to speak indicator, hesitated, then pressed it. A soft chime indicated that a student had a question. Thelvastrin looked up, scanning the room for the source. His eyes found Marcus, and something flickered across his face. Was it surprise? Annoyance? The human rarely spoke during lectures. "Yes, Lieutenant Chen. You have a question?" Marcus stood slowly. The other students turned to look at him. At first glance, humans were not impressive compared to the other species in the assembly. They were smaller than the Korvax, weaker than the Threxians, less adaptable than the Vosnik. But there was something in the way Marcus carried himself that made other species uneasy. He moved like someone who expected danger from every direction. "Commander," Marcus said, his voice respectful but firm. Why is your battleship missing armor here? He gestured toward his own datapad, and with Thelvastrin's permission transmitted his display to the main hologram. Red highlights appeared on the aft sections of the Celestial Dawn, marking the engineering spaces, the areas around the main reactor, the crew quarters, and the sensor arrays. The room fell completely silent. Thelvastrin stared at the highlighted sections for a long moment. When he spoke, his tone was careful, controlled. Lieutenant Chen, I just explained our armor distribution philosophy. Those sections do not require heavy armor because no enemy will attack them. It would be tactically impossible. Why impossible, sir? Because no captain would ever show their stern to an enemy vessel. It would be suicide. You would be destroyed before you could bring your weapons to bear. Marcus nodded slowly as if he had expected this answer. What happens when something gets through your forward defenses? A fighter squadron that breaks through your screening ships? A missile spread that bypasses your point defense? A flanking force that hits you from the side or rear? Thelvastrin's silver skin darkened slightly, a sign of irritation in Korvac's physiology. Our point defense systems are impenetrable. Our tactical doctrine prevents such scenarios. Our fleet coordination ensures that flanking maneuvers are detected and countered long before they become threats. With respect, Commander, Marcus said quietly, that just means you've never fought a real war. The reaction was immediate. A Threxian cadet hissed in anger. The Vosnik delegates' chiming turned discordant. Even the normally peaceful Korvax students straightened in their seats, their skin shifting through colors that indicated shock and offense. Thelvastrin's voice remained level, but barely. Lieutenant Chen, the Korvax Imperium has been engaged in military operations for 3,000 years. We have fought 17 border conflicts, defended our territory against 4 separate invasions, and maintained peace through strength for centuries. I would say we understand warfare quite well. Marcus met his gaze steadily. Border conflicts. Agreed upon rules of engagement. Battles between ships that follow the same tactical doctrine, the same honor codes, the same expectations of how warfare should be conducted. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made the other students lean forward despite themselves. Commander, with your permission, I would like to explain why humanity designs ships differently. It won't take long, but I think it might be important. Thelvastrin stood very still, his centuries of discipline keeping his anger in check. Part of him wanted to dismiss this young human, to remind him that the Korvax had been building warships when humanity was still living in caves. But another part of him, the part that had survived 200 years in the fleet by being willing to learn, was curious. Very well, Lieutenant Chen, he said finally. Educate us. Show us what humanity knows that 3,000 years of Korvax engineering has missed. Marcus activated his datapad, and the hologram changed. The elegant Celestial Dawn disappeared, replaced by something crude and primitive. A ship from Earth's own history, made of steel and floating on water rather than sailing through space. Let me tell you about a ship called the Yamato, Marcus began, and why she's the reason we armor everything. The hologram shifted, showing an ancient warship from Earth's past. To the alien students, it looked impossibly primitive, a vessel of metal plates and gun turrets that floated on actual water. Several students made sounds of confusion or amusement. This is the Yamato, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the whispers. Built by the Empire of Japan in your year 1940 by Earth's calendar. She was the largest battleship ever constructed at that time. Her armor was over 400 millimeters thick in places. She carried guns so powerful they could destroy another ship from 25 kilometers away. The people who built her believed she was unsinkable. Thelvastrin studied the primitive vessel with barely concealed contempt. What does this relic have to do with modern capital ship design, Lieutenant? Everything, sir, Marcus replied. He manipulated the display showing the Yamato's armor layout. Look at where they placed the armor. The belt along the waterline, thick. The turrets, thick. The conning tower, thick. But the deck, the top of the ship? He highlighted the area in red. Thin, very thin. Obviously, a Threxian cadet interjected. The enemy is in front of you on the same plane. Why would you armor the top? Marcus nodded. That's exactly what the Japanese thought. They designed the Yamato to fight other battleships, in what they called surface action, ship against ship, firing at each other across the water. And for that purpose, the Yamato was perfect. He paused, then continued. On April 7, 1945, the Yamato sailed toward the island of Okinawa. She was on a suicide mission to beach herself and use her guns to support ground forces. American forces detected her. Do you know what they sent to stop her? The class remained silent, sensing that something important was coming. Aircraft, Marcus said simply. They sent aircraft carriers, not other battleships. The Yamato never faced a single enemy surface ship. Instead, she was attacked by nearly 400 aircraft that came from above, from below, from every angle at once. The hologram changed, showing archived footage from the battle. The massive Yamato, surrounded by smaller escort ships, fired her anti-aircraft guns desperately at swarming planes. The alien students watched as bombs and torpedoes struck the ship again and again. The deck armor, the thin armor, was penetrated multiple times, Marcus narrated. Bombs went straight through and exploded inside the ship. Torpedoes hit the less armored areas below the waterline. The crew fought bravely, but the ship was doomed from the moment they decided that only frontal armor mattered. The footage showed the final moments. The Yamato tilted, rolled, and then exploded in a massive fireball that could be seen from 60 kilometers away. 3,500 men died, Marcus said quietly. They died because their leaders prepared them to fight the last war, not the next one. They died because someone decided that armor was only needed where they expected to be hit. Thelvastron's silver skin had gone pale. This is ancient history, Lieutenant. Primitive warfare on a single planet. Let me show you something more recent, Marcus interrupted, his tone respectful but unyielding. He changed the display again. This time the hologram showed a space battle. The alien students recognized it immediately. The first contact war between humanity and the Vrex Dominion. It had happened only 20 years ago, and it was the reason humanity had been admitted to the Galactic Assembly. But the details had always been classified. The Vrex built their ships using the same philosophy as the Korvax, Marcus said. Heavy frontal armor, concentrated firepower, doctrine based on honorable head-to-head engagement. When they encountered human colony ships, they expected us to either surrender or engage them according to their rules. The display showed a Vrex dreadnought, elegant and powerful, its bow bristling with weapons and thick armor plating. Then it showed human ships, ugly, blocky vessels covered in armor plating that seemed randomly distributed. We didn't follow their rules, Marcus continued. We couldn't afford to. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and fighting for our survival. So we did what humans have always done when faced with a stronger enemy. We adapted. The hologram began to play out a battle sequence. Human ships approached, the Vrex fleet in a standard formation, as if preparing for a traditional engagement. Then suddenly the formation broke apart. Small craft, Marcus explained as the display showed hundreds of fighters launching from the human ships. We sent them around the Vrex fleet, attacking from above, below, and behind. Meanwhile, our frigates equipped with heavy missiles circled around for flanking shots. The alien students watched in growing horror as the elegant Vrex dreadnought, invincible from the front, was torn apart from behind. Explosions rippled through its lightly armored aft sections. The reactor containment failed. The mighty ship broke in half, its beautiful bow still intact while the rest of it burned. The Vrex admirals protested, Marcus said. They claimed we were fighting dishonorably. They said that attacking from behind violated the accepted rules of engagement. They demanded we face them properly. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each student. We told them that survival doesn't have rules, that our ancestors learned this lesson when they fought wars with nuclear weapons, with chemical weapons, with bombs dropped from aircraft on civilian cities. We learned it when millions of our Mao people died because someone decided that this time surely warfare would be civilized and limited. A Vosnik delegate chimed a question, the sound translated by the universal communicator. How many casualties did your people suffer in this war? Marcus's face hardened. 2 billion dead. 3 years of fighting. Every human colony attacked. 17 worlds burned. We won, but barely. And we learned, again, that you don't prepare for the war you want to fight. You prepare for the war you're terrified might come. He pulled up another image. A human destroyer, scarred and damaged. This ship survived the Battle of New Kyoto. She took hits from every angle. Forward, aft, port, starboard, even from above when a Vrex fighter made a kamikaze run. Do you know why she survived? No one answered. Because we armored everything. The reactor compartment had triple redundancy. The engineering section could be sealed off from the rest of the ship. The crew quarters had reinforced bulkheads. There was no single point of failure that could kill the ship. She was hit over 300 times and stayed in the fight. Marcus turned back to the display of the Celestial Dawn. Commander Thelvastrin, your ship is beautiful. She's powerful. Against an enemy that fights the way you expect, she's probably unstoppable. But what happens when you face an enemy like humanity? An enemy that doesn't care about your tactics or your traditions? An enemy that will send fighters through the debris field of their own destroyed ships just to get a shot at your vulnerable aft sections? The room was absolutely silent. Even Thelvastrin seemed at a loss for words. In human naval academies, Marcus continued, we have a saying, hope is not a strategy. You hope that the enemy will engage you head-on. You hope that your point defense will stop everything. You hope that your tactical doctrine will prevent flanking maneuvers. But hope killed 3,500 men on the Yamato. Hope killed 2 billion humans in the Vrex War. He deactivated his datapad, and the hologram returned to showing the Celestial Dawn in all her glory. I'm not saying this to insult you or your people, Commander. I'm saying it because I've read the intelligence reports. There are hostile forces beyond assembly space, the Dracath swarm, the Korthak hegemony, others we probably haven't even discovered yet. And when they come, they won't care about 3,000 years of tradition. They'll find the weakest point in every ship, every defense, every formation, and they'll exploit it without mercy. Marcus sat down, his message delivered. The other students looked shaken, their certainty about the superiority of assembly military doctrine suddenly in question. Thelvastrin stood very still for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. Class dismissed. We will resume tomorrow. As the students filed out in unusual silence, the commander stared at the hologram of his beloved Celestial, Dawn seeing for the first time not a masterpiece of engineering but a ship with a fatal flaw. 3 days passed before Thelvastrin spoke to Marcus again. During those days, the commander spent his nights reviewing historical records, watching footage from the human Vrex War that had been declassified, and running preliminary simulations in his private quarters. What he found disturbed him more than he wanted to admit. On the 4th day, Marcus was summoned to the commander's office. The room was elegant, decorated with commendations and holographic images of ships Thelvastrin had served on during his long career. The commander sat behind his desk, his silver skin looking somehow duller than usual. Sit, Lieutenant, Thelvastrin said, gesturing to a chair. Marcus sat, maintaining a respectful posture. He had wondered if he would be expelled from the academy for his confrontation during class. Challenging an instructor's expertise was not looked upon kindly in most military institutions, regardless of species. I have spent the last 3 days thinking about what you said, the commander began. I have also spent considerable time reviewing your people's military history. It is disturbing. Yes, sir, Marcus agreed simply. Your species has fought more wars in the last 500 years than the Korvax Imperium has fought in 3,000. Your weapons development accelerated to the point where you created devices capable of destroying your entire planet. Multiple times you came within moments of actually using them. Thelvastrin shook his head slowly. How did you survive yourselves? Barely, sir, Marcus said. And not without learning some very hard lessons. The commander stood and walked to the window that overlooked the construction yards below. Dozens of ships were being built or repaired, their forms elegant and beautiful against the stars. I want to run a simulation, Thelvastrin said finally. A war game. The Celestial Dawn against a human task force. You will command the human forces. I will command the Korvax ship. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Commander, with respect, I don't think that is an order. Lieutenant, yes, sir. 2 hours later, Marcus stood in the Academy's Battle Simulation Center, surrounded by the bewildered faces of his classmates. Thelvastrin had invited the entire class to observe, and word had spread through the Academy. Now, Nearly 200 cadets from various species crowded into the observation galleries above the simulation floor. The simulation center itself was an impressive piece of technology. Holographic projectors created a fully three-dimensional battlefield. Each commander had a control station where they could issue orders to their virtual ships. The computer would then calculate the results based on realistic physics, weapon ranges, and damage models. Thelvastrin took his position at the Korvax command station, looking confident and composed. Marcus stood at the human station, his face grave. "The scenario is simple," announced the simulation controller, a neutral AI voice. "The Celestial Dawn is escorting a convoy through disputed space. A human destroyer group of 6 ships has orders to stop that convoy. Victory conditions: humans must disable or destroy the Celestial Dawn. Korvax must protect the convoy and survive for 30 minutes. The holographic battlefield materialized between them. The massive Celestial Dawn appeared in the center, surrounded by 3 smaller escort frigates and the 5 slow-moving cargo ships of the convoy. At the edge of the display, 6 human destroyers appeared, much smaller than the Korvax dreadnought, but faster and more maneuverable. "Begin simulation," the AI announced. Thelvastrin immediately positioned his ships according to standard Korvax doctrine. The Celestial Dawn moved to the front of the convoy, her massive bow facing the approaching human ships. The escorts spread out in a screening formation, their sensors sweeping for threats. It was textbook fleet defense perfected over centuries. Marcus studied the formation for a long moment, then began issuing orders. The human destroyers accelerated, spreading out as they approached. It looked like they were preparing for a standard engagement, a frontal assault against the Korvax position. The alien students in the observation gallery nodded to each other. This was familiar. The humans would attack. The Celestial Dawn's superior armor and firepower would devastate them, and the simulation would end with a Korvax victory. Perhaps the human had learned humility. Then, at 8,000 kilometers range, Marcus's destroyers suddenly broke formation. 2 ships dove down, relative to the plane of battle. 2 ships veered up. The remaining 2 ships split to port and starboard, beginning wide flanking maneuvers. Within seconds, the human force was attacking from 6 different vectors simultaneously. Thelvastrin's training took over. He directed the escorts to intercept the flanking ships while the Celestial Dawn's point defense systems engaged the fighters and missiles that were suddenly filling space. The dreadnought's heavy guns fired, destroying 1 human destroyer in a brilliant explosion. But the other 5 ships kept coming from different directions. The students in the gallery leaned forward, their previous confidence wavering. This wasn't how fleet engagements were supposed to work. There was no honor in this, no elegant dance of ship against ship. This was chaos. "Launch fighters," Marcus ordered calmly. From the remaining human destroyers, dozens of small craft poured into space. They were tiny compared to the capital ships, but they were fast and they were everywhere. The Celestial Dawn's point defense systems tracked them desperately, destroying many. But there were too many targets coming from too many directions. Thelvastrin made the tactically correct decision. He rotated the Celestial Dawn to bring her main guns to bear on the closest threat, one of the human destroyers that had swung around a port. The massive plasma cannons fired, and the human ship's shields flared and died. Another volley would finish it, but rotating the ship meant showing the aft sections to the other attackers. "All ships," Marcus said quietly. "Target the engineering section." Mark 7 coordinates transmitted. "Fire everything." The 2 human destroyers that had dived below the plane of battle had perfect firing solutions on the Celestial Dawn's lightly armored aft section. Their missiles launched in clouds of explosive death. The fighter craft that had survived the point defense opened up with their smaller weapons, targeting sensor arrays and weapon mounts. The simulation computer calculated damage with merciless accuracy. The first missile impacts breached the thin aft armor. Explosions rippled through the engineering spaces. One of the Celestial Dawn's 4 main reactors went into emergency shutdown. Power fluctuated throughout the ship. "Seal engineering section," Thelvastrin ordered, but his voice had lost its confidence. More missiles struck. The holographic display showed fires spreading through the aft compartments, fires that the crew couldn't reach because those sections lacked the same safety systems as the forward portions of the ship. A fighter craft, its weapons depleted, made a suicide run directly into an exposed plasma conduit. Critical damage to Reactor 3 and 4, the simulation AI announced. Power at 42%. Propulsion compromised. Forward weapons offline for recharge. Life support failing in sections 18 through 34. The students in the gallery watched in stunned silence. The mighty Celestial Dawn, pride of the Korvax fleet, was crippled. She still had her thick frontal armor intact, but she couldn't maneuver, couldn't bring her main weapons to bear, and was bleeding atmosphere from a dozen breaches in her aft sections. The remaining human ships, battered but functional, circled like sharks around wounded prey. Simulation end, the AI announced. Victory, human forces. Celestial Dawn is mission killed. Estimated time to complete loss of ship, 14 minutes. The holographic battlefield froze, preserving the moment of the Korvax dreadnought's defeat. Thelvastrin stood at his station, staring at the display with an expression that mixed disbelief with dawning horror. Marcus shut down his station and walked across the simulation floor to the commander. He kept his voice low, meant only for Thelvastrin's ears, but in the silent gallery everyone heard him anyway. The Celestial Dawn is a magnificent ship, Commander. Against 99% of the enemies in this galaxy, she would win. But that 1%, the ones who don't follow your rules, who don't care about honor or tradition, who will do anything to survive, they'll kill her every time. And they'll do it by hitting exactly where you thought they never could. Thelvastrin turned to look at Marcus, and for the first time, the young human saw something in the ancient officer's eyes that he recognized. It was the same look he had seen in the mirror after the Battle of New Kyoto, after watching ships full of his friends torn apart by an enemy that had no mercy. It was the look of someone who had just learned that everything they thought they knew about war was wrong. How many? Thelvastrin asked quietly. How many ships like the Celestial Dawn exist in the assembly fleet? Marcus had reviewed the public records, including vessels under construction, about 400 capital ships across all member species. Most follow similar design philosophies to the Korvax. 400 ships with fatal flaws. The commander's voice was barely a whisper. 400 ships full of crew who trust that their leaders have prepared them properly. He turned to face the gallery full of students. Every one of them was silent, their faces showing various expressions of shock, confusion, and fear. Class dismissed, Thelvastrin said. Tomorrow we begin redesigning everything. The emergency session of the Galactic Assembly Naval Committee was called exactly 18 days after the simulation. During those 18 days, Thelvastrin had done something that went against every instinct of a military officer. He had shared the simulation results with other commanders throughout the Korvax fleet. The reaction had been predictable. Some dismissed it as an anomaly. Others accused Thelvastrin of betraying his people by revealing weaknesses to other species. A few, the ones who had actually reviewed the data carefully, demanded immediate meetings with their superiors. Those demands had reached the highest levels of the Assembly's military command. Now Marcus found himself standing in a conference chamber that overlooked the Assembly's capital world, facing the Council of Admirals, representatives from 15 different species, each one more experienced and decorated than the last. Admiral Krevosk of the Korvax spoke first. He was ancient even by their standards, over 400 years old, with skin that had darkened to deep charcoal with age. He had commanded fleets before humanity had even invented radio. Lieutenant Chen, he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries, you have caused quite the disruption. Do you understand the chaos your little demonstration has created? Marcus stood at attention, his hands behind his back. I understand that I challenged established doctrine, sir. That was not my intention. I only wanted to answer a question about ship design. A question that has now led to 3 Korvax admirals demanding we scrap our entire fleet, Krevosk said dryly. A question that has made our shipwrights question 3,000 years of expertise. A question that has our allies wondering if the Assembly Navy could actually protect them from external threats. A Threxian admiral, her forearms crossed in a gesture of disapproval, spoke up. The simulation was controlled, artificial. One battle does not prove a fundamental flaw in our naval architecture. With respect, Admiral, Marcus said carefully, the simulation used standard parameters. I commanded human ships the way we have commanded them for the last century. Commander Thelvastrin commanded the Celestial Dawn exactly as Korvax doctrine dictates. Nothing about the simulation was unfair or artificial. Then perhaps, suggested a Vosnik admiral, his crystalline form glowing with agitation, the problem is with human tactics, not our ships. Perhaps your species' approach to warfare is simply more savage, more willing to abandon honor. Marcus felt a flash of anger but controlled it. Survival is not savage, sir. Adaptability is not abandonment of honor. My species learned these lessons because we had to, because when we fought wars, they were total wars, not border skirmishes, not limited engagements, wars where entire nations ceased to exist, wars where cities disappeared in single explosions, wars where losing meant extinction. Admiral Kravosk raised a hand, silencing the Vosnik before he could respond. Peace, Admiral Christel. The human speaks truth even if it is uncomfortable to hear. He turned his dark eyes to Marcus. Lieutenant, we have reviewed not only the simulation but also the classified records from the human-Vrex war. The footage is instructive. The lights in the chamber dimmed, and a holographic display activated. Marcus recognized the footage immediately. It was from the Battle of New Kyoto, one of the bloodiest engagements of the war. He had been there, serving on a frigate that had barely survived. The admirals watched in silence as human and Vrex fleets tore each other apart. The Vrex fought with precision and honor, their ships maintaining formation, their attacks coordinated and beautiful in their execution. The human fleet fought like a pack of wounded animals, desperate, vicious, and utterly without mercy. Notice, Kravosk said, freezing the display at a key moment, how the Vrex dreadnought maintains its optimal firing position, confident in its frontal armor. And notice how the human corvettes, ships that should be fleeing from a vessel of that size, deliberately ram themselves into its engines after their weapons are depleted. The footage continued. The crippled Vrex dreadnought tried to rotate, tried to bring its undamaged weapons to bear, but more human ships swarmed it from behind. Missiles, railgun fire, and even more suicide rams struck the lightly armored aft sections until the mighty ship's reactor finally failed. 13 human ships destroyed to kill one Vrex dreadnought. Marcus said quietly. We lost over 6,000 personnel in that battle alone. But we won. We survived. At what cost? Asked a Korvax admiral, her voice troubled. Lieutenant Chen, your species paid an enormous price for victory. 2 billion dead, you said. Was it worth it? Marcus met her gaze steadily. The alternative was extinction, Admiral. The Vrex made it clear they saw humanity as a threat to be eliminated. We could surrender and be wiped out, or fight and maybe survive. We chose to fight. We chose to live, whatever the cost. The chamber fell silent. These admirals had commanded fleets in conflicts where the goals were limited, where truces and negotiations were always possible, where total destruction of the enemy was considered barbaric and unnecessary. The idea of warfare as an existential struggle was foreign to them. Admiral Kravosk manipulated the display, bringing up new data. We have run simulations of our own, Lieutenant, using the Assembly's current fleet compositions and tactical doctrine against theoretical opponents who employ strategies similar to humanity's. The results are deeply troubling. The display showed simulation after simulation, Assembly fleets engaging enemies that used multi-vector attacks, that ignored formation warfare, that targeted the unarmored and vulnerable sections of ships. The losses were catastrophic in every scenario. Then we ran a second set of simulations, Kravosk continued. We took the same fleet compositions but modified them based on human defensive design philosophy. We added armor to aft sections, reinforced engineering spaces, installed redundant systems. The results improved significantly. A Threxian admiral leaned forward. Defined significantly. Survivability increased by an average of 42%. Mission success rates improved by 37%. Casualties decreased by 51%. Kravosk let those numbers hang in the air. These are not marginal improvements. These are the difference between victory and defeat. But at what cost to our current capabilities? Demanded another admiral. Adding armor means sacrificing speed or weapons or operational range. We would be weakening our ships to protect against tactics that our enemies do not use. Marcus spoke up. With respect, sir, your enemies don't use those tactics because they've never needed to. The Assembly has maintained peace through mutually understood rules of warfare. But what happens when you encounter an enemy from outside the Assembly? One that doesn't know your rules and wouldn't care if they did? He pulled up his own data on a personal display and transmitted it to the main hologram. These are long-range sensor readings from assembly scout ships on the far frontier. The Dracath swarm. You know about them, even if most civilians don't. The Admiral shifted uncomfortably. The Dracath were a known threat, but one that seemed distant, not immediate. They were insectoid, numerous, and completely alien in their thinking. Attempts at communication had failed. They simply consumed resources from any planet they found and moved on. The Dracath don't have honor codes, Marcus continued. They don't have formations or doctrines. They swarm. They attack from every direction at once. They sacrifice thousands of small ships to kill one large one, and they're moving toward assembly space. Not quickly, but inevitably. He changed the display to show a simulation. The Dracath swarm against a traditional assembly fleet. The result was a massacre. Then he showed the same swarm against a fleet using human design principles. Still a costly battle, but survivable. I'm not saying this because humans are superior, Marcus said, his voice carrying emotion for the first time. I'm saying it because we learned these lessons in blood. Because 2 billion of my people died learning them. Because I watched my best friend's ship get torn apart because we didn't armor the right sections, didn't have enough redundancy, didn't expect the enemy to ram us with their damaged ships. He looked around the chamber at the assembled admirals. You have a chance to learn these lessons without paying the price we paid. You have a chance to prepare your fleets before the Dracath arrive, before some other threat emerges. You have a chance to save lives instead of losing them. Admiral Kravosk studied Marcus for a long moment. You carry great pain, Lieutenant. I can see it in how you stand, how you speak. This war marked your people deeply. Yes, sir, Marcus said simply. It marked all of us who survived. We lost our innocence about what war really means. We learned that survival matters more than honor, that preparation matters more than tradition, and that being right doesn't matter at all if you're dead. The ancient admiral nodded slowly.
Then we will learn from your pain, Lieutenant Chen. We will redesign our ships.
We will rewrite our doctrines. We will prepare for the wars we hope never to fight. He looked around at the other admirals. All in favor of implementing the Terran Defensive Integration Program? One by one, the admirals signaled their agreement. Not all of them looked happy about it, but they all recognized the necessity. Then it is decided, Kravosk announced. Lieutenant Chen, you are hereby assigned to the Assembly Naval Architecture Division. You will work with our shipwrights to implement human defensive design philosophy. Acre 6 months after the Council of Admirals' decision, Marcus stood in the observation deck of the Korvax naval shipyard above their homeworld. Below him, stretching for kilometers in every direction, the massive construction facilities worked around the clock. But today was special. Today they were launching something new. Thelvastrin stood beside him, the commander having been promoted to admiral and placed in charge of the entire redesign program. The silver-skinned Korvax had aged in the past months. The stress of rewriting 3,000 years of tradition, showing in the darker patches on his skin and the way he carried himself. There she is, Thelvastrin said quietly, gesturing to the largest construction bay. The ship being moved out of the bay was unmistakably Korvax in her elegant lines and graceful curves, but something was different. Where the Celestial Dawn had been sleek and streamlined, this new vessel looked heavier, more solid. Armor plating covered sections that had been left bare before. Gun emplacements dotted the aft sections, giving the ship all-around defensive capability instead of concentrated forward firepower. The Eternal Vigilance, Thelvastrin announced. The first dreadnought built according to human principles. She masses 15% more than the Celestial Dawn, carries 23% fewer heavy guns, and has an operational range reduced by 18%. But she'll survive, Marcus said. Yes, she'll survive. The Admiral's voice carried mixed emotions, pride in what they had created, sadness for what they had lost. Construction on the Eternal Vigilance had not been easy. Every change Marcus suggested had been met with resistance from engineers who had spent their entire careers perfecting the old designs. Every piece of armor added to the aft sections meant something else had to be reduced or removed. Every redundant system installed meant accepting lower performance elsewhere. The debates had been fierce. Some shipwrights resigned rather than implement what they saw as corruption of their art. Others embraced the changes with almost religious fervor, horrified that they had sent crews into space in ships with such obvious vulnerabilities. Marcus had worked 18-hour days, traveling between shipyards across assembly space, consulting on dozens of redesigns simultaneously. He taught classes at the military academy on threat assessment and vulnerability analysis. He ran simulations where he commanded the enemy forces and showed officers exactly how their ships could be destroyed. He was not popular. Some species resented humanity's sudden influence over assembly military doctrine. There were protests on several worlds, claiming that humans were corrupting traditional warfare with their savage tactics. A few extremist groups even called for humanity's expulsion from the assembly, but the work continued because the admirals understood what many civilians did, not the galaxy was not as safe as they wanted to believe. Other species are adapting, Thelvastron said, as if reading Marcus's thoughts. The Threxians have redesigned their carrier groups to include redundant command structures. The Vosnik are experimenting with modular armor that can be reconfigured during battle. Even the Kelvar, who initially refused to change anything, have started adding aft armor to their destroyers. And humanity? Marcus asked. Your people are building ships I do not even pretend to understand, the Admiral said with a slight smile. I saw the schematics for your new Dreadnought class. It has no front or back, just weapons and armor in every direction. Rotation capability that makes it equally dangerous from any angle. It looks like a fortress that happens to move through space, Marcus nodded. We call it the Hedgehog class. No good angle of attack. Every direction is dangerous. Terrifying and practical, Thelvastron observed. Very human. Below them, the Eternal Vigilance completed her departure from the construction bay. Smaller ships moved around her like pilot fish around a shark, running final diagnostic checks before her shakedown cruise. She would be tested rigorously over the next months, pushed to her limits to ensure that the new design philosophy actually worked in practice. I received a message yesterday, Thelvastron said after a moment of silence, from Admiral Krevosk. The long-range monitoring stations detected increased Dracath activity. The swarm is spreading faster than predicted. They may reach assembly territory within 5 years instead of 20. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. 5 years to prepare for an enemy that fought like a force of nature, that had no concept of surrender or negotiation, that simply consumed everything in its path. Will we be ready? The Admiral asked. I don't know, Marcus admitted. In 5 years, we can retrofit maybe 40% of the capital ships. We can retrain most of the officer corps. We can implement new tactical doctrines fleet-wide. But will it be enough? He shook his head. Ask me again after the first battle. Thelvastron was quiet for a moment, watching the Eternal Vigilance take position for her engine tests. You know, when you first questioned the Celestial Dawn's design, I was angry. I felt that you were insulting not just the ship, but everything my people had built over millennia. Now I am grateful. Don't be grateful yet, Marcus said. Gratitude comes after survival, not before. Such a human perspective, the Admiral observed, always preparing for the worst. It's kept us alive so far. They watched as the Eternal Vigilance's engines powered up, the blue glow of her plasma drives illuminating the darkness of space. She began to move, accelerating slowly at first, then faster, her movements deliberate and controlled. Even in the simple act of moving forward, there was a difference. Sensors swept in all directions. Point defense systems tracked, simulated threats from multiple angles. Her shield generators powered on in a pattern that provided coverage from every vector. She was ready for a fight from any direction. She expected threats from everywhere. She was built by species who had finally learned that hope was not a strategy, and that preparation was the only path to survival. I've been teaching at the academy again, Thelvastron said. New curriculum, of course. Yesterday, a young Korvax cadet asked me something interesting. What did they ask? She asked, why do humans prepare for the worst possible scenarios? She wanted to understand the psychology behind it. I gave her the official answer about probability assessment and risk mitigation. But I wonder, Lieutenant, what is the real answer? Marcus thought about the question, thought about the ruins of New Kyoto, about the memorial walls listing billions of names, about waking up from nightmares where he was back in that battle, watching ships burn and knowing there was nothing he could do to save them, because the worst possible scenario has happened to us, he said finally. Multiple times throughout our history, nuclear war that almost destroyed us, environmental collapse that nearly made our planet uninhabitable, first contact that turned into a war of extinction. Every time we barely survived. Every time we learned that being optimistic doesn't matter, being strong doesn't matter, even being right doesn't matter if you're not prepared. He turned to look at Thelvastrin directly. Your species, Admiral, has been lucky. 3,000 years of limited warfare, of conflicts that could be resolved through negotiation or limited engagement. You never faced an enemy that wanted to wipe you out completely. You never had to make the choice between your principles and your survival. You never learned that the universe doesn't care about honor or tradition or how things should be. And you think the Dracath will teach us this lesson? The Admiral said. I think the Dracath will try. Whether we survive the lesson depends on how well we prepare now. The Eternal Vigilance completed her first maneuver test, rotating in space to demonstrate her all-aspect weapon coverage. It was a move that the Celestial Dawn would never have made, showing the stern to potential threats. But this ship didn't have a vulnerable stern. This ship was dangerous from every angle. The cadet also asked me something else, Thelvastrin said. She asked if I was afraid. Afraid of the changes, afraid of the future, afraid of what might come. What did you tell her? I told her the truth. Yes, I am afraid. I am afraid that despite all our preparations, it won't be enough. I'm afraid that we will face an enemy we cannot defeat. I am afraid that we will learn these lessons in blood just as humanity did. The Admiral's voice was steady despite his words. But I also told her that fear is a gift. Fear makes us careful. Fear makes us prepare. Fear keeps us alive, Marcus smiled slightly. Sounds like something a human would say. I learned it from one, Thelvastrin replied. You humans have given us many gifts, Lieutenant Chen. New ship designs, new tactics, new ways of thinking about warfare and defense. But perhaps the most important gift is this understanding that vigilance is eternal, that safety is an illusion, and that survival requires constant preparation. Not the most uplifting philosophy, Marcus admitted. No, but it is true, and truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is more valuable than comfortable lies. Below them, the Eternal Vigilance completed her tests and began moving toward the outer system for more advanced trials. She would be joined by other retrofitted ships over the coming months, forming the core of a new fleet, one that was ready for threats from any direction.